Chapter 73 Stock Trading. Before leaving, Jiang Xuning thought for a while and said, "Father, there is one more thing." The daughter was in the palace for about the next half a year, and she only returned to the house once in 10 days, and she didn't stay in the house for a long time. But I have a maid in my room, and although I need someone to sweep it every day, I don't need so much. It's better to go back and save a few. Tanger and Lianer are loyal to me. I wonder if I can ask the housekeeper to take it, learn to read the account books, or what kind of Grange property there is in the countryside. Can I take them to see more? Zhangbo Yushang was still immersed in the relief and complexity of his second girl finally becoming sensible. At first hearing her words, he was a little confused. The maid doesn't need to cut half of the book. It's nothing. Your two big girls want to learn to read the account books and run the industry. Why is this? Jiang Xuning felt that the timing couldn't be better at this moment. She pondered and said, since the father already understands what happened in the palace, he should know what kind of danger his daughter was in at that time, and what kind of great luck she was able to avoid this disaster. The daughter was raised by her aunt in the countryside since she was a child, and when she first entered the capital, she really felt that everything in Beijing was prosperous, which was different from the carelessness in the fields. But now that I have experienced these things, I feel that although the capital is prosperous, it may not really be at ease in the countryside. The daughter was naive and asked her father Mo Xiao, because she wanted to leave the capital and return to the countryside to live in Zhuangzi for a period of time after the companion study was over. Zhang Boyu was stunned. He only felt that Ning Yatu's words were shocking and unexpected, but after carefully thinking about the reasons she described, he felt that if a person had such an experience, it was indeed possible to have the same thoughts as her. At this moment, the guilt is even more irrepressible. He opened his mouth, and after a while, he said, "The little girl's family, she hasn't even married yet. What do you say about going out? Although you are inseparable from Yan Lin, you may not meet someone who is like Yan Lin and even better for you in the future. Even if you want to leave the capital, it is best to find a good person to entrust. Don't worry, Daddy also knows that you are bitter in your heart. It's just your mother alas. I want to defend Meng Shi a few words." But when the words came to his mouth, he looked at Jiang Xuning's beautiful black and white eyes, but he was silent, and he could only turn into a sigh at the end. Zhang Boyu patted her on the shoulder, and only said, "You are also tired. I am afraid that you will not even be able to sleep well in the palace. Go back to the room and have a good rest. As for Tanger and Lianer, since you want to, I will explain it to the housekeeper when I go back, and I will do as you say." Jiang Xuning chose this opportunity to say it now, just to make some foreshadowing, lest she suddenly propose to leave the capital half a year later, and her family felt that it was unacceptable, so Zhang Boyu did not directly agree, which was also expected. She neither fought nor refuted. Instead, he nodded obediently, bowed, and went out of the study. After chatting with Zhang Boyu for a while, Tang Erliener had already come back from inquiring about the news, guarding under the corridor, and when she saw her come out, she followed behind her, and whispered in a low voice, "It's terrible." The mother-in-law of Qingyuan Bafu said that after Miss Fang Yin offended Miss Yu last time, she was locked up and released for 6 or 7 days. But this hasn't stopped for a few days. Miss Yu has come back from the palace again, and she doesn't know how to toss her. Asterisk. Yu didn't have time to toss Yu Fangyin now, sitting in her room, and after listening to the words of the little maid and her mother-in-law, both eyes lit up. "What you said is true." The mother-in-law was still a little confused, and she didn't know why she cared so much. But the young lady cared about it, so she said more and more certainly, "It's all true, that Ren Weizi lives in the Shuxiang Inn in the capital, and tells others every day that he has researched a new thing that can dig a deeper well. But the big guy saw that he was a shabby, and he asked for a lot of money, so no one dared to buy any shares. When we went to inquire at the orders of the young lady, the shopkeeper of the inn was urging him to pay for the room, saying that if he did not give it, he would be thrown out. How can there even be such charlatans these days? It seems that this Renwiazi is not having a good time now. But if Nazwochsutsui is real. Yu stood up and walked back and forth, looked out, and saw that it was still early, so she only said, I can only stay at home for a few days when I leave the palace. Where can I find this kind of opportunity in the future? The mother-in-law was startled. Where are you going? Yu glanced at her with disgust, obviously thinking that she was not clever enough and talked a lot, so she said angrily, of course it's going to Shuxiang Inn. After speaking, he thought of Yu Fangyin and asked, that little hoof is still honest this time, right? The mother-in-law said, I only give 1 meal a day, but I can be honest. Yu's eyes rolled, and she pondered, Miss Ben's golden branches and jade leaves, how can she show up like those lowly breeds? That little hoof has gone to the market to sneak around to find out about these news. Go, take the scumbag, change her into clean clothes, and tell her to go out with me. The mother-in-law was amazed. She really couldn't understand what her girl was going to do, and she wanted to ask a few more questions, but she was afraid of being punished by her, so she had to go to the firewood room to pick up people with suspicion. After winter, the weather turned cold, and the firewood room was cold and leaky, so only a quilt was given. Yu Fangyin hugged her knees and sat in the corner. His hair was messy, his clothes were dirty, and because he was always hungry and cold, he couldn't sleep at night, his eyes were bloodshot, and his eyelids were even more black, and he looked haggard than he had been 10 days ago. When the mother-in-law came in from outside, she looked up and saw that everyone was ghosted. She didn't react until she heard the voice. When he spoke, his throat was dry and his voice was hoarse, second sister wants to let me out. The mother-in-law didn't dare to do anything to Yu, but she raised her nose and sneered lightly at her, and didn't even answer her words, only asked the rough girl next to her to put a bucket of cold water on the ground, and then threw down the cloth skirt worn by the subordinates, and said, hurry up and clean yourself up, and go out with the second girl in a while. After saying that, he snorted and left. Yu Fangyin was stunned in the corner of the wall for a while before she reacted, and when she stood up, she felt that the blood in her head was rising, and the sky was spinning, and she almost fell. Fortunately, she hurriedly held onto the pyre next to her, and slowly eased up. The second sister has never been kind to her, but now she wants her to change into clean clothes and go out with her. Is it a thing for the artesian well-salt pen? Yu Fangyin's mind finally gradually appeared when Zhang Xuning told this story to herself, and she also remembered that she didn't want to mention her lowered eyebrows when she was bullied in the palace, only to feel that the 10 days of suffering had suddenly paid off, and the dark sky that she was out of breath seemed to light up a little. She gritted her teeth, endured the cold that made her shiver, stripped off her dirty clothes in the wood room, and wiped her body covered with old and new scars with the cold, lukewarm water from the barrel. Then put on that simple cloth skirt. After recurling his hair, he walked out of the firewood room with his face facing the sky. Yu was already waiting impatiently in the carriage outside the side door, and when she saw Yu Fangyin walking over with her mother-in-law like a lepro, she taunted her, look at this poor little appearance, it's the same as your cheap mother. Why, you don't have the strength to talk back now, do you? Yu Fang saluted, I've seen the second sister. Yu rolled her eyes, lowered the curtain directly, and said, you just sit on the wheel outside, don't come in and dirty my car. Yu Fangyin still didn't understand, where is the second sister going, and what are you taking me for? Yu only said, give you a chance to atone for your crimes. Now Miss Ben is going to the Shuxiang Inn, and she will meet that Renwiazi. If you can help Miss Ben get this errand done, Miss Ben won't punish you in the firewood room the next time she enters the palace, and she can let you go out and put a few sticks of incense on your dead mother. Yu Fangyan's heart suddenly shook. Yu had already sneered and warned her, but you must not play any tricks, otherwise there will be a way to cure you. Yu Fangyan has realized that the perfect opportunity has come. She has grown up in the contempt and scolding of others since she was a child, and she has no feeling for Yu's vicious words, and her endurance is amazing. She replied sneeringly, yes. Then she honestly climbed into the wheel, and clung to it with some fear, and as the coachman glanced at her sympathetically and shook off the whip, the carriage drove out of Qingyuan Bafu and went to the Shuxiang Inn. Asterisk. Jiang Xuning heard Tang Er and Lianer's response, and only felt that her head was as big as a fight. Yu Fengyan is obedient, pitiful, and willing to work hard, but how difficult is it to use his fists and feet in this back house? He doesn't even have the freedom to leave the mansion at all, and he is still detained by Yu all day long, and he has no ability to resist, which is really worrying. She sighed as she had lunch. Tang Er couldn't stop comforting her. It's a rare blessing for Miss Yu to be able to get your help. All the women in the world are listening to their parents at home, and she can't get out of this situation for a while. You can eat, but don't sigh, the slaves and maids are worried. Lianer also had a bitter face. Yes, I can't think of a way. Jiang Xuning put the chopsticks down, simply didn't eat them, and said, who said there is no way? Soon after earning the first pot of gold, Yu Fangyan in the previous life found an opportunity that no one in the mansion noticed, escaped from Yu Mansion, found someone she knew in the 3 religions and 9 streams to buy a road guide, and took advantage of the relationship on the business road all the way out of Beijing, and simply left her hometown to go to Jiangnan to expand her territory. As for Qingyuan Bafu, it's just that she lost an insignificant concubine, and after reporting to the official, she just thought that she was taken away by the flower child, and she didn't pay attention to it. It wasn't until a few years later that Yu Fangyan's rich armor changed and returned to the capital, and the people of Qingyuan Bafu recognized her, but at this time, Bafu had already fallen, not to mention that Yu Fangyan's money could communicate with his spirits, and he was not afraid of a small Bafu at all, so there was no trouble. It's just that Yu Fangyan in this life is somewhat cowardly, and in the previous life, Yu Fangyan had the courage to simply leave Bafu and go to the end of the world alone. Even she may not have it, how dare she expect Yu Fangyan in this life to do the same? So Jiang Xuning is also really worried. She thought about it and couldn't think of a good way to get Yu Fangyan out of trouble, so she simply put it down for the time being, and said, if you have the news from Fangyan, continue to listen, prepare the carriage first, and let's go to the Shuxiang Inn. The legendary Renwiazi, Jiang Xuning has never seen it. Although I am not ready to make a move now, if I can meet people first, I will have some confidence in my heart. It's just that she didn't expect that the carriage had only left the house for a moment, and there were still 2 streets away from the Shuxiang Inn in the west of the city, and Lianer, who was quietly looking out of the car, had round eyes, pulled her in surprise, and pointed out to the car, girl, look, is the slave dazzled, isn't that Miss Fangyan? Jiang Xuning didn't believe it. What? She hurried forward and looked in the direction of Lianer's finger. Not far in front of her, a carriage was turning around, and in addition to a coachman sitting on the wheel, there was also a girl with a delicate face. Jiang Xuning was stunned. That's the carriage of Yu Mansion. Lianer nodded again and again. Yes, the carriage of Yu Mansion. This is too strange. I don't know if it's strange that Yu Fangyan can come out, or if it's strange for her to sit on the wheel. Or both. Jiang Xuning stared in that direction for a long time, but suddenly laughed, and only said, tell the coachman to follow from afar, and you don't need to get too close. I think they're going in the same direction as we do, so let's go slower and see what they do. Tang Er hesitated, but aren't you going to find that Renwiazi to do something? If someone preempts it? Jiang Xuning looked at Yu Fangyan for a long time, and confirmed that although she looked haggard, her body was fine, and then slowly lowered the curtain and said, This matter is not in a hurry. Tanger was surprised. How can you not be in a hurry? Jiang Xuning couldn't explain the trick, but she suddenly remembered a word in her previous life that impressed her, so she laughed and said, "Have you ever heard of stock trading? Whoever enters first wins." Chapter 74, A Trick. Although I don't know where you heard the news, but I have sent someone to inquire clearly. There is indeed such a person as Ren Weizi. His family does have a salt farm in the artesian well that has been around for a few years, but now there is basically no salt, and even a few long-term workers can't be found. Seeing that the Shuxiangyin was already in sight, Yu explained to Yu Fangyin, "My identity is different from yours, and I don't know what kind of pickled and filthy place the Shuxiangyin is. Then I'll stop the carriage outside and wait for you at the tea house opposite. Then you go into the inn and ask me about it, and come back to me in a moment. If someone asks you about your identity, you say that you are only here to hear the news, and there are big customers behind you. Don't pretend to be a big-tailed wolf in front of outsiders. It's completely used as a maid for you Fangyin. And it's easier to use than a maid. Since this little cheap hoof can have money from unknown sources, maybe it is earned by herself. Whether it is true or not, send her to one can hide people's eyes and ears and prevent her from coming forward in person. Second, you can try the depth of this hoof to see if she is hiding something catty. Third, if there is any accident in this matter, it is also convenient for her to directly plant the blame on Yu Fangyin's head. If you use your own maid, it won't have such a good effect." Yu was very satisfied with her plan. Yu Fangyin didn't speak when she heard this, and looked like she was obedient. As soon as the carriage arrived at the opposite side of the Shuxiang Inn, it stopped. Yu Fangyin got out of the car. Yu only said, "Remember not to tell people that you are from Qingyu and Bafu, ask carefully, especially the situation of the salt farm and the money he needs, keep it in mind." Yu Fangyin nodded, and walked towards the Shuxiang Inn. Shuxiangyin knew by listening to the name that it was opened by merchants from Shu in this place. The west of the capital has never been a place where princes and nobles built their mansions, but there are many tiles and fences, and most of the people walking on the street are from the south to the north, and even some beggars sit on the side of the street and beg. Fortunately, Yu Fangyin can be regarded as a person who has seen a big scene. After all, the last time I came into contact with the raw silk business, I went in and out of the Jiangsu and Zhejiang Guild Hall, and I walked through dozens of chambers of commerce, although there were some apprehensions now, but a small Shuxiangyin did not make her at a loss. It was also at this moment that she clearly realized. I'm not the same as I used to be. Standing at the door of the inn, she shook her fingers vigorously, took a deep breath, and walked in. This inn has 2 floors and occupies a large area, but the interior decoration is extremely ordinary. It looks even a little old and dilapidated, and there are still knife marks on the few tables in the lobby, and I don't know what happened before. It was already noon, and there weren't many customers down. Only a few small traders and passers-by stop here, order pots of wine and a few plates of food and sit in the corner to eat. The shopkeeper also stood listlessly behind the counter. He glanced at Yu Fangyin when he walked in, and yawned, as if he hadn't seen it. It wasn't until the eyelid was down and about to touch the lower eyelid that he suddenly stirred up and reacted that there was a guest. Just opened his eyes and looked Yu Fangyin up and down, and he was a little puzzled. Nowadays, there is a lot of rumors in the capital, and it is rare for a girl to come out alone. He smiled and asked curiously, "Is the girl going to stay in the hotel?" Yu Fangyin glanced at the stairs next to her and said, "Find someone." The smile on the shopkeeper's face decreased, and his expression became strange, and he said, "No, you're looking for someone too, girl. Don't tell me that you're also here to find the person surnamed Ren upstairs, right?" Yu Fangyin was a little surprised. "Is Gongzu Ren here?" The shopkeeper had already opened the account book, took out the abacus, and was about to receive guests, but at this time he rolled his eyes and closed the account book directly, and pointed to the left stairs without even raising his head, and said, "Upstairs, turn left to the innermost room." But someone came looking for him half an hour ago, and he hasn't left yet. If I knew that so many people were coming to find me, I should have collected money according to the head. If someone comes to him, he will collect a few pennies, so as to subsidize the house money owed by this poor ghost. Euphangien didn't know what Renwiazi's situation was now, and when she heard the shopkeeper pointing the way, she was very grateful, and bowed to him and said, "Thank you, shopkeeper, then I'll wait below for a while. I don't know if it's about business, but it's not good if you disturb others." She didn't have any money, she couldn't order anything, so she stood by and waited after saying this. Coincidentally, I didn't stand for a while before someone came down from upstairs. Footsteps creaked on the old wooden staircase. Euphangien raised his head and saw a young man in a long robe walking downstairs, with an ordinary face and a thin body, but with a pleasant posture, his hands behind his back, and a fan pendant of Hessian topaz between his fingers. He walked down and stopped in front of the counter, took out a silver ticket in his sleeve, put it in front of the shopkeeper, and said, "The money for the house of the young man upstairs is later. If it is a long time, it will be recorded in the account, and it will be concluded on the 15th day of the first month of the new year." The shopkeeper was startled. Ouch, generous. He picked up the silver ticket and looked at it, looking at the 7 words Tonghi ticket number 100 taels on the top, and smiled happily. "It seems that I want to congratulate this nobleman, and I also want to congratulate Ren Gongzi. This is a good business. This person is not an outsider, it is Lucien, the owner of the Yuhuang Pavilion, who is not doing his business now, and he has seen a lot of the shopkeeper's face like a Philistine, so he waved his hand and said, 'It's just a little bit of help, and I haven't talked about any business yet.' The shopkeeper immediately said, 'I know. Lucien scolded you in his heart, sneered, and didn't bother to take care of anything, turned around and left.' At this time, the shopkeeper's mood was much better, so he said to Yufang, who was standing on the other side, 'Girl, now that Ren Gongzi's guests are gone, you can go up and have a look.' Only then did Euphangien know that the young scribe was Renwiazi's guest. She couldn't help but take a second look. Lucien saw a girl in this kind of place where the 3 sects and 9 streams gathered, although he also felt a little strange, but he didn't think much about it at first, and walked over. When he heard the shopkeeper's voice, he stopped abruptly. "This girl is also here to find Renwiazi?" Lucien didn't hold back, turned around and looked back. This time it was a coincidence that he met Euphangion's eyes. "It's really a Jingchai cloth skirt, this one is a little shabby. Looking at the facial features are good, they are delicate, but they are a little sick and thin, and their eyes are extraordinarily large and bright, and they are a little surprising at a glance." He was stunned. The girl didn't seem to expect him to turn back, and was startled, and like a frightened rabbit, she quickly withdrew her gaze, only bowed slightly apologetically to him, and then went upstairs. Lucien's brows couldn't help frowning. Could it be Renwiazi's relatives? But I haven't heard that he has any sisters, let alone that he has a family. He was a little suspicious in his heart. As soon as he raised his eyes, he saw the carriage parked across the street, and then glanced at the emblem on the top. His eyelids jumped suddenly, and his mind flashed with lightning. There is a carriage in Yufu, and there should be a master of Yufu in the tea house opposite. The girl he met just now was thin and haggard, although she was wearing a maid's clothes and was not as good as a maid, but her demeanor was not like a maid. Could it be that concubine in Qingyuan Bafu? Lucien looked back at the Shuxiang Inn again. His eyes flashed with deep thought, but at the end he laughed. Interesting. He stroked his palm lightly, and he had already made up his mind. Originally, he planned to go back to the Yuan Pavilion directly, but then he changed his mind, got into the soft sedan chair waiting on the side of the road, and said, "Go to Xia Mansion." Asterisk. Yu Fangyin went upstairs. Turn left into the innermost corner. She stopped outside the door, stretched out her hand, and knocked lightly. "May I ask if Ren Gongzi is there?" Ren Weizi is 24 years old this year. He has failed many attempts, and he has not even taken the test as a child before the age of 20, so he stopped thinking about it and took over the family salt farm after his father's death. It's just that the salt farm in the family has been passed down for 3 generations, and after hundreds of years of mining, it is close to exhaustion, and he is angry and not good at management, and the family's situation is not as good as before in only 2 years, and even worse. By now, the original long-term workers have gone. He borrowed money everywhere but couldn't, and had to sell a lot of ancestral property to make up enough to go to Beijing, and he had been in Beijing for almost a month, and many people heard about his invention of Zhou Tube well, and they all came to the inn to listen to the news. But most of these people don't really want to lend him money, or give money to buy shares, they just want to trick him into looking at the drawings in his hand. I can't be deceived after coming and going, so I naturally dispersed. There are fewer and fewer people in this inn who come to him, and even many people say that he is a liar, who has lost his ancestral property and does not manage the salt farm well, so he went to Beijing under the banner of some invention to swindle and deceive. In the words of those people, for hundreds of years, so many people have not come up with a way to dig wells in the depths, and you are a nerd who is immersed in studying, and you have never even been to the salt works a few times, let alone personally drawn salt brine, and you actually say that you have a way. I want to know that it's just talk on paper, and it's nice to say. Just sent Lucien away. Ren Weizi was a little disheartened. Having come into contact with so many people, and having also spent time in the imperial examination, he could see that this Lu Ziyin was by no means a small person. It's just that the other party is not as eager as others at all, although he also inquired about the situation of his artesian well salt farm, and also asked him about the situation of Zhou Tuajing, and was even willing to give him silver for temporary relief, but he never mentioned the matter of money into shares, and only said that he would come to him in a few days. Ren Weizi didn't know how long he could last. He was wearing a dark blue brocade robe, the cuffs were already a little wrinkled, his fair face had a pair of good-looking Danfan eyes, his lips were not thin or thick, he was a face that had not suffered much since he was a child, and there was some freedom between his eyebrows. Right now, I'm pacing around the house in a state of dismay. When he heard the knock on the door accompanied by the sound of inquiry, he was stunned at first, and then hurriedly stepped forward to answer the door, and only said, "Yes." Squeak, the door opened. Ren Weizi saw the person standing outside, who turned out to be a plain girl. He looked behind her, but he really didn't see anyone else, and couldn't help but be a little confused. Yes, the girl is looking for me. Yu Fangyin didn't expect him to open the door so quickly, and the hand that knocked on the door was still raised in mid-air, so he put it down a little embarrassedly, and said, "If you are Ren Gongzi, then I am looking for you." Ren Weizi didn't know her, so he only said, "What's the matter with the girl?" Yu Fangyin remembered what Su Wenyi taught herself when she was doing the raw silk business, and she would never sell it when she should be concise, so she said very briefly, "Artesian wells, salt farms, Zhou Tube wells, pay money, and shares." Ren Weizi suddenly opened his mouth slightly, only to feel incredible. This girl doesn't look like she is rich. But what kind of characters in the capital don't have it? He has nothing, so it can't be someone who tricked him into a beauty trick, right? Thinking of this, he suddenly laughed self-deprecatingly, took a step back, and let Yu Fangyin inside, saying, "It turns out that it is also for the salt matter, please come in." Haven't asked the girl what to call her. Although Yu Fangyin had talked about business with Su Wenyi before, Su Wenyi was not young and even had children, she only regarded Su Wenyi as an elder. This Renwiazi is the same age as her. After entering his shabby guest room, she was inevitably a little restrained, and only said, "My surname is Yu." Renwiazi nodded. "Then I will call you Miss Yu below, please take a seat." There was only a bare square table in the guest room, on which rested a plate of cold corn tortillas, a few teacups, and a pot of tea. There were 3 chairs on the side. He invited Yu Fangyin to sit opposite him, then took the teapot and poured a cup of tea for her, and smiled ashamedly. A few days ago, when the guests were serving such a light tea, they still couldn't wipe their face, but the mountains and rivers were exhausted to this point, and they couldn't do it even if they wanted to save face. Forced by the situation, "Please don't dislike Miss Yu." Yu Fangyin was a little flattered, took the teacup with both hands, and only remembered that he couldn't even drink coarse tea in the bafu, and felt a little desolate for a while, so he only said in a low voice, "Don't dislike it." Renwiazi looked at her. She took a sip of the teacup, and when she saw the plate of cold corn pancakes, she raised her eyes and glanced at Renwiazi, and said slowly, "Can I eat this?" Renwiazi was stunned, looked at the plate of pancakes, his face was about to burn, and his speech became stumbling. This, noon, you can eat it, but it's already cold." Yu Fangyin curled her lips and smiled, "It's okay. She's just a little hungry." With the master's permission, Yu Fangyin put down the teacup for the time being, picked up a piece of corn pancake from the plate, and took a small bite to eat. The cold food slides into the abdominal cavity and is warmed by the heat of the body. She obviously didn't feel very wronged, but after only a few bites, tears rolled down unconsciously, almost choking. Renwiazi only thought that an unusual customer had come, but she didn't even finish half a piece of pancake and started crying. Can only say dryly, "You, don't cry, others still think I'm wrong with you." Yu Fangyin buried her head and stared at the gap on the corn tortilla that was bitten out by herself, but muttered something irrelevant. "It's so difficult to live, what kind of is face?" Renwiazi was suddenly stunned. Asterisk. Jiang Swining waited in the car for a long time. Looking to the left, Yu does not come out of the tea house, and to the right, Yu Fang does not come out of the inn. She was bored. What to do if you are bored? Yu is powerful in her own house, always bullying and abusing Yu Fangyin, so she doesn't go down to find Yu's bad luck. It's really a little unreasonable. Thinking like this, Jiang Swining said decisively, "Get out of the car." Tanger and Lianer helped her down, and she went directly to the tea house next to her. This tea house is in the shape of a hollow word, and a stage is set up at the bottom, which is reserved for people to sing or write books, but at this time there are neither singing nor storytellers, and it looks quite deserted. Yu is on the 2nd floor. Jiang Swining glanced upstairs when she entered, and just in time to see Yu's position, she pointed to the position of the hall that greeted her, took out all the arrogance that had been held back for many days, and said, "I want the position upstairs." As soon as the cousin saw her posture, and then looked at this dress, he knew that she was a rich master, and the smiling faces were piled up at the moment, and she wanted to welcome people inside, who would have thought that this young lady was amazing. The smiling faces froze. His eyelids jumped and he looked upstairs. He swallowed and said, but there are already people in that position." Jiang Swining's eyelids lifted and glanced at him. "Tell her to get out." "Cousin." It can be seen that this girl has a grudge against the one above, and she is looking for trouble. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead, and he didn't know what to do with it for a while. This tea house is not that big. From upstairs to downstairs, I can't hear it clearly. Yu was muttering to Yu Fangyin why she hadn't come out yet, but she heard someone talking below, and she said something, "Tell her to get out. You must know that there are not many guests upstairs at the moment, and this voice sounds familiar." She frowned and looked downstairs. This glance almost didn't make her grit her silver teeth with hatred, and she suddenly got up from her seat. Okay, the road is narrow, I won't embarrass you, you Jiang Swining will embarrass me. Jiang Swining raised her head, as if she had just seen her at this time, and covered her lips in surprise. I thought it was upstairs that had no eyes to occupy my favorite position, but I didn't expect it to be Miss Uer. Yu was angry, you dash. Seeing that the ugly words were about to be spoken, but she rolled her eyes, she was stunned, she just moved, walked down the stairs slowly from the stairs with a graceful attitude, pinched her throat and said, alas, I still wanted to deal with you, but when I think that you are now a phoenix that has lost its hair and is not as good as a chicken, I feel that you are pitiful. Jiang Swining listened to such ridicule in her previous life, and she really couldn't arouse her anger, so she only smiled and watched Yu approach. Her complexion remained the same, but Yu's complexion changed. Seeing that this did not work, new hatred and old hatred surged in his heart, and he became more and more vicious. Look at you, the origin of a small family, a savage who grew up in Zhuangzi, and I don't understand the rules at all, and I want to climb the branches to be a phoenix. I don't dare to say it in the palace, but I should advise you outside, it's just a matter of being a girl's family who doesn't know how to check up with a man and ruin the reputation of my daughter's family. I don't know who used Yanji Hao's mansion to bully people in the past, and now that family is going to be killed. First of all, Yanlin Shize, I don't know what will happen to that cover in the future. The color of Jiang Swining's eyes finally darkened. She slowly curled the corners of her lips and her gaze wandered around the tea house. At the end, he muttered to himself, it's strange, why don't you even have a fish tank in this tea house? Fish tank. When Yu heard these two words, the hairs on her back stood up almost immediately, and she instantly remembered the scene when the madman in front of her pressed his head into the fish tank with a cold and angry face. A sense of crisis immediately crept up. She saw Jiang Swining's gaze turn back, landed on her gently, and even stretched out her hand to put it on her shoulder, and suddenly screamed in fright and brushed it towards her hand. Jiang Swining was a little devil who everyone feared when he was a child in the Zhuangzi Mountains, not to mention the reborn and accumulated a suppressed anger that could not be released, and he was not afraid of a little Yu at all. She pondered that she wanted to make Yu more profound in her impression. But before she could do anything, she heard Tanger behind her say to her in a low voice, Miss Fangyan is here. Jiang Swining's eyelids jumped, and she remembered the lie she had told in front of Yu Fangyan before. She was the one who was bullied by Yu so much that she didn't even dare to say more. You can't show it. She reacted very quickly, without waiting for Yu to react. As soon as her legs bent, she screamed, fell to the ground softly and weakly, gently pressed her heart with one hand, and sobbed with the other half-hidden face, Miss Yu, how can you? Like this. Yu felt that the scene was a little familiar, and the back of her head began to tingle reflexively. She first glanced around, and confirmed that neither the eldest princess nor Yanlin was there, so she breathed a sigh of relief, turned her head and saw that Jiang Swining was still acting, and as soon as she was angry, she scolded angrily, You madman! Who do you pretend to show all day long? Did I push you? Did I push you? What can I do to you if I really push you? Do you think anyone can see me now? As soon as Yu's voice fell, she made a mistake and finally saw Yu Fangyan standing outside the door of the tea house. This person, who has always been docile and easy to bully in her eyes, stared at her with a pair of eyes, and her eyes were even redder, and she asked word by word, Did you push the second girl? Only then did Yu remember that Jiang Swining was Yu Fangyan's life-saving benefactor. But she didn't feel that she needed to be afraid of Yu Fangyan, she was just a concubine born to a concubine. Sneered at the moment, and wanted to mock. Who expected that the next moment I saw Yu Fangyan without even saying a word, and directly picked up a bench in the lobby of the tea house and walked over to her. What are you doing? You're crazy. Someone, help, help. Yu Fangyin came from the opposite inn, and when she first saw Jiang Xuning, she was very surprised, but then she saw that her second sister actually pushed the second girl down, and she only felt cold in her heart for a while. But in an instant, this cold turned into infinite flames. She didn't know if she was crazy or not, but at this moment, she didn't want to back down, let alone back down and compromise. She just wanted to be stronger, and if she was stronger, she could protect the people she wanted to protect. The bench was in her hand, and she couldn't see the other people in the tea house, and there was only Yu in her eyes, so she approached her step by step. Where has Yu ever seen such a deathless thing? Even if she speaks evil words, she is just a boudoir lady, not to mention that she has never seen Yu Fangyin look like she is possessed by an evil demon. She was so frightened that she retreated again and again, and tears came out. "You, get out of the way, come on, help!" she screamed. But even the maids were frightened and screamed and retreated. Yu sat on the ground in a panic, and when she cast her eyes around for help, she happened to catch a glimpse of Jiang Xuning, who had just fallen to the ground. Where does the slut still have the weak and pitiful appearance he used to be? Completely lazy, he gently arranged his falling strands of hair, and even looked at her with a little pity and sigh. Also gently waved his hand and instructed the maids beside him, "Persuade, don't make trouble. Yu is crazy." The same trick was used twice on her alone, and after she was hit once, the second time she was still hit. This hateful demon. Glamorous. Cheap. Goods. Chapter 75, Jiang Xuning PTSD. The scene in the tea house was very lively for a while. One person chases, one person runs. The one who chased was hiding a pair of cold flames in his eyes, and he had long since lost his original weak and easy to bully appearance, and the one who ran was even more embarrassed, accidentally tripped over the corner of the table and fell to the ground. The hall of the tea house wasted a lot of effort and snatched the stool down. Yu Fangyin didn't have the weapon in her hand and refused to give up, grabbed Yu who was close in front of her and fought, dragged her delicate hair bun messed up, her delicate makeup was spent, and even the bead hairpin on her head fell off, crying and making trouble. Where is there still a little bit of the arrogance of the daughter of the Bafa before? Tanger and Lianer are afraid that something will happen. As soon as Jiang Xuning spoke, the two of them ran up, one on the left and the other on the right, and it took a lot of effort to pull Yu Fangyin back, and she hurriedly persuaded her, "Miss Fangyin can't be angry about this, don't be impulsive." Yu Fangyin's eyes were red. Even if she was persuaded by someone, her body was still trembling, as if she hadn't heard Tanger and Lianer's words at all, staring at Yu who was sitting on the ground. "You try to move the second girl again." Yu was already frightened, and she was still frightened. Jiang Xuning looked at this scene, the corners of her lips that were still easily curled up just now slowly lowered, and an indescribable sourness flickered in her heart. This stupid girl is willing to risk her life for herself. It wasn't until this time that the maid who was originally waiting by Yu's side reacted, and hurriedly stepped forward to help her girl up, and asked with a crying voice, "Miss, are you okay?" Yu stood up tremblingly. But she was afraid that Yu Fangyin hadn't finished going crazy, so she didn't dare to get close to her, so she only retreated to the corner next to her, and said in a trembling voice, "It's the opposite, it's the opposite, I think you have forgotten what your surname is. This appearance is clearly strong on the inside, strong on the outside, and dry in the middle." Jiang Xuning saw that her face was pale and her legs were still trembling, so she knew that she was an embroidered pillow, and at the moment she was just saying cruel words for her own face. But when she got back to the house, Yu is a temperament that sees the wind and rudder, bullies the soft and fears the hard, although she is frightened by Yu Fangyin at this time, but if she returns to the mansion, she will listen to Yu up and down, and when she eases up, I am afraid that she will not let Yu Fangyin go easily. Therefore, Yu Fangyin can't go back. Jiang Swining's heart was racing rapidly, and a bold idea suddenly popped up and gradually took shape. Yu said, staring at Yu Fangyan's terrifying gaze, only to feel that her heart was hairy, and she was afraid that talking too much would arouse her ferocity, so she hurriedly turned the spearhead and aimed at Jiang Swining. Even if you have been studying with classmates in the palace for more than 10 days, I didn't see that you are such a despicable and shameless villain. Jiang Swining was still covering her heart. How can you spew blood so much? Yu saw her pretentiousness, and Deng Ju rushed up to her head with a burst of anger, pointed at her nose and scolded, "It's all a 1,000-year-old fox, what are you pretending to be in front of me?" Jiang Swining looked at her, and her gaze suddenly became strange. "Why do you listen to Yu's meaning? You still have to renovate this method. It's not impossible." Yu didn't feel anything unusual when she first spoke, but she just scolded Jiang Swining for a bad breath. But when she raised her eyes and saw Jiang Swining's thoughtful eyes, she felt a cold breath rushing up from under her feet. "When I reacted, I almost wanted to slap myself twice. Stupid or not, tell her this. Let her change some new tricks to trick herself in the future." Yu Fangyan saw that Yu was so domineering towards Jiang Swining, and the breath that she had endured before faintly rose again, and she was about to step forward to do something as soon as her body moved. But she didn't expect Jiang Swining to gently press her hand. She was stunned for a moment, and didn't dare to move again, only afraid that she would accidentally hurt her under her recklessness, and at the same time raised her head to look at her in some confusion. Jiang Swining didn't look back, lowered her eyes slightly, her eyelashes fluttered, she sighed softly, looking timid and afraid, and only said, "Please also ask Miss Yu to calm her anger. Xuening also unintentionally passed by this tea house today to come in to rest. Where did you think that you would meet you by such a coincidence? You misunderstood that I was disrespectful to you, so you did it to me, but I didn't have the slightest intention of fighting back. It's all to blame on this Yu Fangyan." She was still whispering softly at the beginning, but her voice became heavier when she said the last sentence. Yu was stunned for a moment, didn't react, and looked confused. Yu Fangyan also looked at Jiang Swining in great surprise, not understanding why she said this, but the next moment she felt Jiang Swining holding her hand, slightly forced, as if hinting at her something. Then the hand was withdrawn. Jiang Swining scolded indignantly as if she had done nothing. "Although I saved her life, I have nothing to do with her. I didn't expect her to misunderstand the relationship between us, and even picked up such a scary thing as a bench to beat people without saying a word. In broad daylight, at the feet of the Son of Heaven, there was simply no one in his eyes, and there was no heavenly reason, and there was no royal law." Yu felt that her brain was a little insufficient. Jiang Swining looked at her firmly and said, "Second Miss Yu, you have suffered such a great grievance that you almost lost your life. How can you give up? Let's report to the official." Yu was dumbfounded. Huh? Jiang Swining looked like she wanted to draw a clear line with Yu Fangyan. "Report to the official, arrest her. Such a person who doesn't know what to do and doesn't abide by dignity will go to prison and imprison her for a few months, and keep her honest. Report to the official, arrest Yu Fangyan." Jiang Swining would be so kind. Even if the sun hits the west and comes out, Yu won't believe it. She had suffered too many losses under Jiang Swining's hands, and she couldn't even count them with her fingers. At this moment, she only felt that there was a piece of paste in her head, and she felt that something was wrong. Although she was in the tea house, she looked at the table in the hall and felt that it was a trap, and she was full of herself, waiting for her to step forward without paying attention. "No, you must not report to the police. Even if she doesn't know what Jiang Swining is going to do, as long as she disagrees with her, it's absolutely right." So, the tea house hall and a few tea customers who put the bench back next to them saw a strange and confusing scene of painting. Yu vigilantly and directly refused, "No, don't report to the official, You don't need to report to the official for this trivial matter. Jiang Xuning was extremely enthusiastic. How can it be said that it is a trivial matter? They have all picked up a bench and are going to beat you. It is simply going to harm people's lives, and at worst, it is also a picking quarrels and provoking troubles, disturbing the public order of the capital. This piece is now also under the control of Jin Yiwei, who does not know Jin Yiwei's powerful methods. We will report to an official and arrest her, and she will definitely have no good fruit to eat. Besides, if you don't report to the official, you will have to explain that the tea house has suffered a lot of things for no reason, right? Tea house. It's not really worth a lot of money. But we don't dare to say it. Yu had already faintly collapsed, but she still had a little hope, and wanted to reason with Jiang Xuning. I'm not injured, I'm sick, I don't have anything, and she didn't beat me dash. Jiang Xuning didn't care about her. He turned straight to Tang and said, go to the official, please ask the adults of Jin Yiwei to come and see, today we have to administer justice for second Miss Yu. Yu almost went crazy. Who wants you to administer justice? Tang who witnessed Jiang Xuning's actions throughout the whole process and also understood the meaning of her words, only felt cold sweat on her head, but when she looked up, she saw that her girl really didn't change her face and her heart didn't beat. She answered and walked out of the tea house. I went to the official according to the instructions of my own young lady. Yu saw that this posture was wrong, and she raised her foot and wanted to leave. Unexpectedly, Jiang Xuning grabbed her quickly, looked confused, and said, I have already gone to report to the official, second Miss Yu, you are the bitter master, don't go. Yu's eyelids jumped, it's you who reported to the official, not me, you let go. Jiang Xuning refused to let go, and smiled kindly, am I not afraid that you will be angry? Yu was so angry that she was smoking, and a sense of foreboding became stronger and stronger, and she just wanted to throw Jiang Xuning's hand out regardless of the 3721, but as soon as her hand was raised, she met Jiang Xuning's playful gaze. It's like saying, you try one. The scene of Jiang Xuning not being touched by her but immediately falling to the ground and touching porcelain is still deeply rooted in her heart. She almost immediately didn't dare to do anything, she was afraid that her hand would go out. Jiang Xuning fell to the ground again, and then something like Shenzai and Yanlin immediately appeared around, and she couldn't eat it and walked away. One has the intention to stop people and is unscrupulous, and the other has no courage to flee and throws a rat into a trap. The scene froze. Jiang Xuning is a good swimmer, but Yu is anxious. Fortunately, the Jinyi Guard Yamen is not too far from here, and the person concerned and the surrounding people didn't wait long before the people came. Jin Yiwei was set up 20 years ago, when the rebellion of the king of Pingnan had just been decided, and the emperor specially compiled Jin Yiwei in order to maintain law and order in Beijing, and cooperated with Shunshanfu and Jukan soldiers and horses to take charge of the order in the city. It's just that the Jinyi Guard gradually developed, and the successive commanders were all close ministers of the Son of Heaven, and their hands stretched out longer. Listen to intelligence, meddle in prisons, investigate cases, and take people. In all the affairs of the court, you can see the shadow of the brocade guard. Jin Yiwei also aroused the disgust of civil and military officials. However, although there are few incidents in the capital now, the rules set by the emperor 20 years ago are not broken. It's just that the two of them are fighting for such a trivial matter, and Shunshanfu can solve it. What are these people doing when they are blind and report to Jin Yiwei? And even thousands of adults came together. The brocade clothes who came to run the errand were so clean and straight that when he stepped in from the outside of the tea house across the threshold, he couldn't help muttering in his heart, and glanced at the side. Zhou Yinzi, the newly promoted brocade guard, walked on his left. The flying fish suit with a black background is embroidered with delicate patterns with fine silver threads, and an embroidered spring knife is pressed into the scabbard at the waist, and Zhou Yinzi's palm is gently placed on the handle of the old silver. He was very tall and oppressive when he walked in. A pair of eagle-like eyes raised and scanned, and saw Jiang Xuning sitting in the lobby of the tea house, drinking tea calmly. Opposite Jiang Xuning, there was also a young lady from a noble family with a pale face, and a girl with her head lowered and her eyebrows lowered next to her stood a little silent. He didn't recognize the last two. The brocade guard who ran the errand was his subordinate. These trivial things in Beijing didn't need him to come forward with 1,000 households, but it was Tang Er who came from the Yamen, and he wanted to report to him by name, and then Zhou Yunzi knew that Jiang Xuning wanted to do something. He called a few subordinates, and he followed. The subordinate who started the head was called Feng Cheng, who was born 5 big and 3 thick, and his eyes were as big as copper bells, which was a little scary, but he glanced at him with a little hesitation at this moment. Zhou Yunzi nodded lightly. Feng Cheng understood, stood up straight, stepped forward and shouted towards the hall and asked, "Who reported to the official?" Jiang Xuning glanced at Zhou Yin, then turned her eyes to look at Feng Cheng, got up and said lightly, "I reported to the official." Yu also stood up, but she couldn't wait to disappear here. Feng Cheng looked left and right, there were no dead people, and no one seemed to be injured, and he couldn't help but wonder, "Are you the bitter master? Why do you report to the official? Didn't you say that someone was picking quarrels and provoking trouble? Where are the people?" Jiang Xuning stretched out his hand and pointed, "It's all here." She pointed at Yu first, and then at Yu Fangyan. Yu glared angrily. Yu Fangyan blinked. To be honest, she didn't know what Jiang Xuning was going to do, but just now she shook it warmly and hard, but it made her believe that the second girl would definitely not be unfavorable to her, so she didn't speak, just watched. Jiang Xuning explained the situation again, "My lord, think about it, at the feet of the Son of Heaven, even the benches have been copied. If we hadn't stopped it in time, I'm afraid that someone would have died." Feng Cheng heard that it was Bafu and served a snack. He turned his head to look at Yu. What she said is true. Yu had already drunk half a cup of tea when she was in a stalemate with Jiang Xuning, and after thinking about it carefully, although Jin Yiwei was still in charge of public security in Beijing, this matter was really not worth mentioning. Even if he came, people were afraid that they would not want to take care of it. Either way, she is the sufferer. If the bitter master doesn't pursue it, Jiang Xuning won't want to pick out any storms to calculate her in this matter. At this moment, Yu denied it without hesitation, "There is no such thing." Jiang Xuning mended the knife, but everyone saw it just now. Yu's face instantly turned ugly. She resisted the urge to grind her teeth, and said word by word, "Please also ask your lord to be clear. It was actually the concubine of my uncle's mansion who did it, and she didn't fight. If she has something to do, just let her father punish her. There is no need to pursue it." Feng Cheng felt inexplicable. "You don't pursue it?" Yu was categorical, "Yes." Jiang Xuning's abacus was already crackling in her heart, only to feel that there was no better way to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Seeing that Yu had already entered the trap, where would she let the cooked duck fly away? She didn't care what Yu thought. "At the moment," he said coldly beside him, "the state has national laws, and the family has family rules. It is understandable that Yu Fangyan has committed something at home and it is handled by the Bafu, but if she commits something outside, it is for the laws and regulations of the country to take care of it. If it's light, it's a fight, and if it's heavy, it's trying to kill you but it didn't work. Isn't it serious?" "No, what's the matter with you, girl?" Feng Cheng didn't know Jiang Xuning's identity, and after knowing that Yu was the second lady of Bafu, he subconsciously thought that Zhou Yunzi was here for Yu, and Jin Yiwei didn't want to care about this bits and pieces, who didn't want to miss 2 errands. So he looked at Jiang Xuning very unpleasantly. At that moment, he frowned and stared at her. His voice became louder, and said, "Everyone has said that this matter will not be investigated. What are you yelling at next to you?" Yu Yu's face suddenly burst into joy. Jiang Xuning glanced at Feng Chen. Feng Chen also felt that this girl didn't know where she came from so many things. She was used to showing off her power in the Jinyi Guard, and wanted to continue training her, but unexpectedly, a calm and cold voice suddenly came from behind her. What are you yelling about? Feng Chen's neck was cold. He heard that this was Zhou Yunzi's voice, stiffened his body and turned his head to look, and saw Zhou Yunzi frowning at him. A pair of dark eyes were cold and ruthless, which made him feel like falling into an ice cave. What? He just said a word to the girl who was not interested and ignorant. How did Lord Qinhu react? Jinyue is a place of intrigue and intrigue. Feng Cheng finally mixed in, and he was a little clever, and he reacted almost immediately, but he was afraid that he was yelling at the wrong person. The corners of Yu Yu's curved lips had solidified. Jiang Xuning had a sarcastic smile on her lips. The whole tea house was silent, and the hall looked at the brocade guards in the lobby tremblingly, and only muttered in their hearts like everyone else, "Good girl, how did you make such a big battle?" Zhou Yunzi stepped forward and bowed to Jiang Xuning. These people under their hands don't know the severity, and their words offend the second girl, and I hope the second girl is not strange. Jiang Xuning and Yu Yu are both in their own homes. But now no one will mistakenly think that the second girl in Zhou Yun's mouth is talking about Yu Yu. Feng Chen, the subordinate who had reprimanded Jiang Xuning before, was frightened by the cold sweat on his forehead at this moment. Yu Yu's complexion changed suddenly. At this time, I finally understood what Jiang Xuning's idea was. Sure enough, he changed his means to deal with her. Looking at the tall man in front of her who was wearing a brocade Wei suit, she was trembling like chaff, and she couldn't even make a voice. You, I am the bitter master. You can't catch me. Zhou Yunzi didn't laugh, and didn't care what Yu Yu's reaction was. He only said, in recent days, the party has been rampant in Beijing, and I have already issued an order not to pick quarrels and provoke trouble, but you are knowingly committing a crime, and you can't ask for results in this tea house for a while, and you can't judge whether it is an attempted murder. Someone came, took the two suspects into custody, and returned to the yamen to await trial. Several brocade guards behind him immediately responded, yes. These people have already arrested many princes and nobles, and they are unceremonious when they encounter a woman, and they don't care how people struggle, and they immediately go up and take people. Yu Fengyan was okay, she didn't resist, she looked obedient. Yu Yu was struggling to the death. Their uncle's mansion was also related to Jinyue before, so they naturally knew what methods these people had for interrogation, but they only heard that those officials in the DPRK and China were worse than death if they fell into the hands of Jinyue. Where did she dare to go? Immediately, he cried out, Jiang Xuning, you have such a vicious heart, you actually colluded with these people to kill me. It's you, bitter master, who is arrested. Jiang Xuning frowned. She had made a kind face with the snake before, but at this moment, all the temperature under her eyes had receded. She only looked at her, and said in her voice without ups and downs, what are you yelling about? People stood in the middle of the hall, like ice and snow. The indifference of the body even has a cold taste, which makes people feel cold in their hearts just by looking at it. Although this was said to Yu Yu, Feng Chen, the Jinyue who had not trained her before, listened to it, but he didn't even dare to raise his head, and secretly his intestines were repentant. Yu Yu closed her mouth even more abruptly. She looked around, the onlookers had already dispersed, and the Jinyi guard, headed by Zhou Yunzi, stood in a black pressure, and her heart was as if she was dead for a while, but she didn't dare to say a word anymore. God knows how these guys will torture her. Yu Yu's face was in a trance, as if she had lost her soul, and she was escorted away by a brocade guard. When Yu Fengyan was escorted away, Jiang Xuning showed a faint smile at her. Yu Fengyan smiled back. Zhou Yunzi saw that the people were walking away, So he looked back at Jiang Xuning and said, "A few days ago, I heard that the palace was closed for 10 days, and Joe wanted to pick a time to come to the door to thank you in person, and if I didn't want to meet it today, I can also do my best for you. I just don't know, what does the girl want to do with this matter?" Jiang Xuning walked back and sat down at the table. She picked up the unfinished tea she had drunk earlier, and only smiled faintly. "Yu Fengyan is my person, Lord Kinhu, just watch it." As for Qingyu and Bafu, the loss of power is the loss of power, but I heard that there are 3 points of nails for breaking ships. Hey, I came here today and fell in love with a good piano, but unfortunately, it's a little more expensive. I've been a little tight lately.